So perhaps the only person who believes that being a billionaire is actually thinking too small is Jeff Bezos. Some people predict he's going to be the world's first trillionaire. He is the founder of Amazon.com. He used to be a venture capitalist, and he's just a massively successful entrepreneur and the second richest person in the entire world. So, unbelievable person and one of the smartest people in living today. So I put together this compilation of videos to really expose you to the most important knowledge of Jeff Bezos. Listen to this as many times as you possibly can. And if you're interested in learning more about how to start your own internet business or going to Amazon.com, the links are in the description. Enjoy.
I had some family role models, and I had some other people, you know, some sort of historical role models that I really looked at too. So certainly my grandfather was a serious role model for me. I just had spent so much time. I think you learn different things from grandparents than you learn from parents. It's a great. I would encourage anybody to try to spend time not only with their parents but with their grandparents. But I also had two people I always would read about, and were Thomas Edison and Walt Disney. Those were sort of my two, biographical heroes. My math teacher in either 4th or 5th grade, I can't remember, Mrs. McInerney, she had a big influence on me. My calculus teacher in high school, Mr. Moore, he had a big influence on me. Mrs. Delchamps, who taught chemistry in high school, Mrs. Rule, who taught physics. I really, I have been blessed with, conscientious, hardworking, super smart teachers. And I don't know, because, I only got to go through school once, so I don't know if, I have a feeling I was lucky.
I'd been hearing an ad campaign about smoking. I can't remember the details, but basically the ad said, every puff of a cigarette takes some number of minutes off of your life. I think it might have been 2 minutes per puff. At any rate, I decided to do the math for my grandmother. I estimated the number of cigarettes per day, estimated the number of puffs per cigarette, and so on. When I was satisfied that I'd come up with a reasonable number, I poked my head into the front of the car, tapped my grandmother on the shoulder, and proudly proclaimed, "At 2 minutes per puff, you've taken 9 years off of your life." I have a very vivid memory of what happened next. And it was not what I had expected. I expected to be applauded for my cleverness and my arithmetic skills. Instead, my grandmother burst into tears. I sat in the back seat, didn't know what to do, while my grandmother was crying. My grandfather, who'd been driving in silence, pulled over onto the shoulder of the highway. He got out of the car and came around and opened my door and waited for me to follow. Was I in trouble? My grandfather was a highly intelligent, quiet man. He had never said a harsh word to me, and maybe this was to be the first time. Or maybe he would ask that I get back in the car and apologize to my grandmother. I had no experience in this realm with my grandparents, and no way to gauge what the consequences might be. We stopped beside the trailer. My grandfather looked at me, and after a bit of silence, he gently and calmly said, "Jeff, one day you'll understand that it's harder to be kind than clever." What I want to talk to you about today is the difference between gifts and choices. Cleverness is a gift. Kindness is a choice. Gifts are easy. They're given after all. Choices can be hard. You can seduce yourself with your gifts if you're not careful, and if you do, it'll probably be to the detriment of your choices. So the most important thing, when you're thinking about books, the most important thing is they're constantly encouraging, the kind of participants in the book industry to think this way. The most important thing to observe is that you have to draw the box big. Books don't just compete against books. Books compete against people reading blogs and news articles and playing video games and watching TV and going to see movies. Books are the competitive set for leisure time, and it takes many hours to read a book. It's a big commitment. And if you narrow your field of view and only think about books competing against books, you make really bad decisions. What we really have to do, if we want a healthy culture of long-form reading, and you have to differentiate between short-form reading and long-form reading. If you want a healthy culture of reading, book-length things, you've got to make books more accessible. And part of that is making them less expensive. Books, in my view, are too expensive. $30 for a book is too expensive. And if you just think, well, I'm only competing against other $30 books, then you don't get there. But if you realize that you're really competing against, Candy Crush and everything, then you start to say, well, gosh, maybe we should really work on reducing friction on long-form reading. And that's what that's what Kindle has been about from the very beginning. We humans co-evolve with our tools. We change our tools, and then our tools change us. And in the internet era, almost all of the tools for reading have been reducing the friction of short-form reading. The internet is perfect for delivering, 3 paragraphs to your smartphone. The Kindle is trying to reduce friction for reading a whole book, and it's working. The vision for Kindle is every book ever in print, in any language, all available in 60 seconds. Surely making reading more affordable is not going to make authors less money. Making reading more affordable is going to make authors more money. Invention is not disruptive. Only customer adoption is disruptive. At Amazon, we've invented a lot of things that customers did not care about at all. And believe me, they were not disruptive to anyone. For innovation, you need a bunch of different kinds of people on a team. We need lots of operators on our team, so innovation comes in 2 major flavors. Everyday incremental innovation, and that's probably 70% of what we do, is just getting every little process a little bit better every day. That's so important. Any company that doesn't do that well is not going to succeed. And then there's this big, kind of white sheet innovation when you start something new. For that kind of innovation, in real invention, kind of clean sheet invention, you need people who, and this is very tricky, you need people who are experts in a certain domain area, because the world is so complex today. It's really hard to invent something if you're not an expert, if you don't have the underlying tools at your disposal and know what's going on. You can't, invent something in neurosurgery without knowing something about neurosurgery. It's just going to be very difficult because we're very advanced, and that's true in every field of endeavor. But to really be an inventor, you have to combine that expertise with the beginner's mind. You have to have a certain childlike ability to not be trapped by your expertise. And that fresh look, that beginner's mind, once you're an expert, is unbelievably hard to maintain. But great inventors are always looking. They have a certain divine discontent, and they may have seen something 1,000 times, and still it occurs to them that that thing, even though they're accustomed to it, could be improved. And that's, you have to look for people like that. And I also think cultures support that. You can't, even if you're that kind of person, if you're in a culture that doesn't support failure, willingness to fail is critical for invention. Willingness to be misunderstood for long periods of time. Most inventions don't really work that well in the beginning. They're clumsy, they're little toddlers, they're always falling and tripping. And so you have to have culture in your organization that supports this kind of stumbling and wandering.
Just because you're wandering doesn't mean you're lost. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind when you're trying to invent. I think it's the very rare idea that can be done by a single individual. Almost everything that is going to change the world, solve a problem, improve something, these are usually big efforts, and they require a team working together to really get something important done. And that has been the story of Amazon.com. At every step along the way, we've had a team here that is making this work. I mean, I don't know, even at the smallest scale, you have to figure out how to get help from your friends, from your family members, from people that you can hire in those early days. I think without that, it would never work. Hire smart people.
And how do you go about that?
If you don't hire, because a single individual cannot keep in touch with the plethora of of new things happening. So what you have to do is you have to put in place a recruiting process that attracts and retains smart, talented, hardworking people who want to be a part of your mission, whatever it is. Now, all we need is a clear, consistent vision and the ability to execute on it very, very well at high speed. And that second piece comes from having large numbers of talented employees with lots of executive bandwidth to help guide them. And so, individuals do not win. I work with these people who, they're missionaries for what they do. They are, if you're giving great customer experience, the only way to do that is with happy people. You can't do it with a set of miserable people, watching the clock all day. Okay, I think this one is a very important question. What does day 2 look like? I know the answer to this. Day 2 is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And that is why it is always day 1. Thank you, you guys. We have a very distinctive approach that we have been honing and refining and thinking about for 22 years. And it's really just a few principles that we use as we go about these activities. At the very top of the list is one I've already mentioned, but you'll probably hear it 10 times throughout tonight because it's so central, and it is customer obsession. It's customer obsession instead of, for example, competitor obsession. We did have the all-hands meeting, and I asked all of our 125 employees to be terrified and to wake up with their sheets drenched in sweat every morning, and I carefully specified sweat, but that they should be afraid not of our competitors, but they should be afraid of our customers, because our customers are the only ones who are going to ever give us money, and so that helps. It actually helps have that kind of customer focus because it helps you stay heads down. You don't get worried about what your competitors. Your competitors are going to do what your competitors are going to do. You can watch them, you can learn from them, but you can't let them set your strategy. You have to do what you're going to do, and you also can't let the media set your strategy. But you do see that happen. You can't let Wall Street set your strategy either. And what you do with those early investment dollars, so if you have $300,000 and then you have $1 million, what you do with those early precious capital resources is you go about systematically trying to eliminate risk. So you pick whatever you think the biggest problems are and you try to eliminate them one at a time. And that's how small companies get a little bit bigger and then a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger until finally, at a certain stage, you reach a transition where the company has more control over its future destiny. You know, when a company is very tiny, it needs a tremendous amount of not only hard work, but as we talked about earlier, luck. As a company gets bigger, it starts to become a little more stable, where if at a certain point in time, the company has a much bigger influence over its future outcome. It needs a lot less luck, and instead it needs the hard work. And at that point, there's a little bit more pressure, because then if you fail, you have nobody to blame but yourself. Nimble and robust, so you need to be able to take a punch, and you also need to be quick and innovative and doing new things at a high speed. That's the best defense against the future. And you have to always be leaning into the future. If you're leaning away from the future is going to win every time. Never, ever, ever lean away from it. Inside our culture, we understand that even though we have some big businesses, new businesses start out small. And so, it would be very easy for, say, the person who runs our U.S. books category to say, why are we doing these experiments with things? I mean, that generated, a tiny bit of revenue last year. Why don't we instead focus those resources and that, all that brain power on the books category, which is a big business for us. And instead, that would be a natural thing to have happen. But instead, inside Amazon, when a new business, reaches some small milestone of sales, email messages go around and everybody's, giving virtual high fives for reaching that milestone. And I think it's because we know from our past experiences that big things start small. The biggest oak starts from an acorn, and you've got to recognize, if you want to do anything new, you've got to be willing to let that acorn grow into a little sapling and then finally into a small tree, and maybe one day it'll be a big business on its own. Do something you're very passionate about, and don't try to chase what is kind of the hot passion of the day.
I was working at a financial firm in New York City with a bunch of very smart people, and I had a brilliant boss I much admired. I went to my boss and told him I was going to start a company selling books on the internet. He took me on a long walk in Central Park, listened carefully to me, and finally said, "That sounds like a really good idea, but it would be an even better idea for someone who didn't already have a good job." That logic made some sense to me, and he convinced me to think about it for 48 hours before making a final decision. Seen in that light, it really was a difficult choice, but ultimately, I decided I had to give it a shot. I didn't think I'd regret trying and failing, and I suspected I would always be haunted by a decision to not try at all. After much consideration, I took the less safe path to follow my passion, and I'm proud of that choice. Tomorrow, in a very real sense, your life, the life you author from scratch on your own, begins. How will you use your gifts? What choices will you make? Will inertia be your guide, or will you follow your passions? Will you follow dogma, or will you be original? Will you choose a life of ease, or a life of service and adventure? Will you wilt under criticism, or will you follow your convictions? Will you bluff it out when you're wrong, or will you apologize? Will you guard your heart against rejection, or will you act when you fall in love? Will you play it safe, or will you be a little bit swashbuckling? When it's tough, will you give up, or will you be relentless? Will you be a cynic, or will you be a builder? Will you be clever, at the expense of others? Or will you be kind?
What I would hope Amazon's legacy would be is Earth's most customer-centric company. What we have always wanted to do is raise the standard for what it means to be customer-centric to such a degree that other organizations, whether they be other companies or whether they be hospitals or government agencies, whatever the organization is, they should look at Amazon as a role model and say, how can we be as customer-centric as Amazon?
Even competitors, I imagine, right?
Hopefully competitors as well. But if we could make, if that could be our legacy, that we kind of raise the general idea of what it means to be customer-centric, that would be a huge accomplishment. It would be accomplishing a mission that's much bigger than ourselves. Many hundreds of people, working over a number of years. So some things are still, require big teams, lots of resources, many years to pull together, and those are very important innovations too.